The meaning and purpose of work is a topic that I find endlessly interesting, especially now that AI is very much on the horizon. I am listening to more and more podcasts covering this topic, and I'm finding it fascinating how the thinking is so varied, and also what are we going to do about work. So, I decided to speak to philosopher Joel Uili, who has an amazing YouTube account focusing on people's career archetypes. He is supporting and helping people finding their essence, their purpose, truly their guiding career vocation archetype for life. Our conversation was widespread, going from astrology to spirituality to our sense of soulfulness, and also what are we going to do post work. I hope that you found this conversation as interesting as I did. And if you have any questions, feel free to leave that in the comment section below this video. I'll also be adding all of Joel's information so you can find out how you can start working with him to truly reconnect with your purpose, vocation, and sense of soulfulness beyond and also with work. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this conversation between Joel and I. Welcome, Joel, to this interview. The first question that I am going to ask you is, so you have a YouTube channel which focuses around career, soulfulness, archetypes. How come you chose to focus on that for your creative and expression on YouTube?
So it wasn't planned. I wish I could say it was planned. It wasn't planned. It was a personal journey of frustrations. And it all began with me trying to figure out what my own path was. And I tried a lot of different solutions. I went into different rabbit holes. I did personality tests. I dived into my natal chart. And many of these tools, like I got so much from them, but nothing gave me like the answer, the thing. And that was super frustrating to me. And so I just sometimes I can get really, really obsessed. And this is one of those things that just came into my face and said, like, hey, you got to figure this out. So I went super, super deep
Mm,
onto it. And I wanted to figure it out. And by going into it and diving in, we can speak about all of those details, but diving into it, I found out I was a philosopher. And that moment of realization was such a pivotal moment in my life that I wanted to see what else is in this terrain, what is going on here. And
mm,
the path that is mapped out for people that are creative, that are spiritual, is so poorly done that I was like, okay, there's a lot of space here for me to do work that can help to contribute. And I also am just naturally drawn to it, geared to it. And so that's how it sort of began. And YouTube is just a place for me to express that. It's just it's like a window where people can come in and view through that window the work that I do.
mm. So, I mean, there's so much I'm interested in. First of all, I'm interested in like the personality types you took, test you took, and also like what your natal chart is. Being somebody who also knows those things about myself, I'm like, I wonder where he fits. But I suppose what I'm, if you could, if you could define the philosopher archetype, like what is, how would you describe that? Let's say somebody is watching this and they're like, "Ooh, I wonder if I fit into the philosopher archetype." And like, yeah, how did you find out that that was your archetype?
So there's like the definition layer, and I just define it simply as someone that wants to pursue wisdom, because philosophy is a love of wisdom, it's the pursuit of wisdom. So that's what
Mm,
I'm trying to do with my work. In terms of how I found out, I went through this period of going through gathering self-knowledge, and I went and looked at all through all these different lenses of how I could get access to my own self-knowledge. I sort of had an understanding that there was knowledge that I wasn't aware of just because I was interested in Jung's work. And anyone that's familiar
mm,
with Jung is familiar with the unconscious. I was like, okay, there's material that I don't know about myself, which is one of the reasons why something like a Ikigai didn't work for me, because it sort of assumed that, hey, you should already be sort of consciously aware of these things. And so there was
Mm.
these unconscious layers. I was like, okay, how do I get into that? So I was gathering self-knowledge through personality tests. You know, Myers-Briggs was one of them. I did the hexacode, like slash Big Five test. I did my Enneagram. Couldn't tell you what my Enneagram is. I can't, I did it so long ago. And went into astrology, looked at my life mythology, like mapped out what was my past life, what am I currently doing at the moment? Where does this trajectory take me? Is there any sort of mythology running through it? So I was trying to gather all of this knowledge. And as I was doing that and just taking, notes and notes and notes, I'd always be having these conversations with my girlfriend and would be having these conversations about my path. And sometimes she'd like throw out these different titles. And I'm like, no, that's not really it, not really it. Like, there was
Mm.
some that I did connect with, and there was definitely like some affinity for it. Like artist was one. I was like, okay, there's something, but it wasn't it. It wasn't the thing. And then one day she just said philosopher, and I was just like, ugh, it just hit me viscerally, up and
Mm.
down. And the thing that I did after that was I tried to break it. So I'd be like, no, no, like I want to doubt this. I want to smash it. I want to. I had a natural feeling that it shouldn't break under pressure, and so that's what I did, and I couldn't break it, and it caused me to completely change my life trajectory. Mm.
Thank you for sharing that. And before we came on, you told me that you've been doing this type of work really full time, devoting your time to it for about 6 years. What would you say have been some of your key learnings of that period? Like, what are some of the three top key learnings walking this path as a philosopher for that duration of time?
It's a good question. One of them is the things that you're interested in mean something, no matter what that interest is. So, on a really superficial layer, you might say, okay, I've got a favorite movie. I've got a favorite, I'm enjoying this video game, a book series, a celebrity that you follow. There's something in that that speaks to what is in you, and often what is meant to be in your path. Might not be direct, like just because you're really into actors, you're meant to be a movie star, as an example. But there might
Mm,
be something in the essence of these things that you're getting drawn to, and it's going to be in your work. And I just kept finding that again and again and again, where people are drawn to certain things. They often don't realize that what they're drawn to, like everybody else isn't, hey, everybody else isn't into the, diving into, I don't know, gardening or something like that.
mm,
And whatever those things are, yeah, you have to pay attention to that because it's speaking about your path. Another one. Another one that I found really, really interesting is the distortion of we get told to pursue these singular paths or to specialize. And what I was finding, especially like going over history, because I'll study different people's vocations throughout history, is that there are these different periods in time where the ideal is to pursue more than one thing or to somehow merge different interests into your path. And we just happen to be at a point in history where there's this definite focus and this
mm.
you can say that it's because of the industrial revolution and but there are different moments as well. And so I think that the more people that I'm working with that have these sort of they're more like open, they're more
Mm,
they're more receptive to their own curiosity. The more I'm noticing that there's a very particular kind of path that's for them and they are not set up for that path. And that's a part of the reason why there's so much tension in finding their path at all. Um, yeah, I mean, if you wanted to comment before I think of a third.
yeah, no, no, it's really interesting what you have just pointed out because it is something that it took me a while to acknowledge that I am arguably what you would call like a generalist, right? Which is what you're speaking to, is that you have many different interests and you can apply those many different interests in different ways to have a vocation of some sense. Like I am somebody who you're describing who's enjoying a few different bits and pieces here and there, and somehow all of this comes together to build somebody's life. Like, I have just never been somebody who can like sit down and like follow this like expertise path for one, like, and it baffles me. Like, I don't know, let's just imagine, I mean, thank God we have like cancer researchers who's just like an expert at like cancer research. They should absolutely do that, and they should stand by their desk for X amount of hours and like really focus on that. But there's a part of my brain which I'm just like, how does anybody do that? Like my brain doesn't just doesn't compute in that way because I have so many
Mm.
different interests, and that's what gives my life soul, and or gives my, yeah, gives my soul life. And I think that modern society isn't necessarily set up in such a way that you can do that quite easily. And it's also, it's something I've had to build for myself basically, and it's what I'm building, and it's sort of working, which is amazing. But yeah, I think that's a really interesting way of looking at it. Just out of curiosity, what was your do you remember what your Myers-Briggs was?
Yeah, ENTP.
What does the P stand for? Perception?
Yeah, or prospecting.
Oh,
It speaks
prospecting.
to seeing multiple different options. Mm.
Ah, right, because I switched between INTJ and ENTJ, basically.
Mm.
That's where I fit. What is that? What does that, just off the cuff, what does that tell you about me, Joe?
Well, there's definitely like a forging ability.
Yeah.
So, I mean, with the extroverted thinking, they can forge their paths in the world a little bit easier than other people who have to
Mm,
develop that side of themselves. Um, Also, that you would be able to personally lead, you'd have an easier time of leading yourself, if that makes
mm,
sense.
mm.
Self-sovereignty would probably be a better way of framing that. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's absolutely true. It's also fits with, so my sun sign is also Leo, so it's sort of, it really, like, it couldn't be, I think it couldn't be more aligned basically with like the sun sign and the personality type that Myers-Briggs shows me. And like my moon is Aquarius, which again, both of them are like
Mm,
fixed signs, you know. So it's all like my entire chart just has so much fixedness in it, because I also have like loads of
mm.
Virgo as well, which is a fixed sign. So there's incredible. So I have to, I'm someone who, through my own personal growth, have had to work on flexibility, basically. In some ways, it works with me really, really well because it means that I am probably on average more like committed and disciplined, you know, because of that fixedness of my natal chart. But I've had to work on bringing in openness and flexibility, basically, which I have. And so it's a really interesting thing to notice that within myself and then work on growing it because it can change, right? It is malleable, so it definitely can change. Where does your what's your natal chart? Just out of curiosity.
Yeah, I mean, which placements would you like to know?
Like the
Happy to
three main
share.
ones.
Yeah, so I got Libra rising, Libra moon, and a Sagittarius sun.
Oh, right. So my rising is Libra. That's a lot of air, isn't it? Well, it's both. It's the
Yeah,
same for
my
both
my
of us.
my chart
Two
is
air.
pumped with air and fire.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
How does that show up in your personality?
Yeah, well, one of the interesting things was like as I was trying to figure out what my path was, first I had to deal with all this fire and air. But when I was looking
Mm,
at how astrology describes the career, which is like 10th house matters, I'm having to look at my 10th house, which is Cancer. I also have midheaven in the 10th house. And I remember first
mm.
hearing this and I got so annoyed because I was like, I'm not nurturing. I don't know what this is talking about. I don't want to look after because it would say things like you could be a great nurse, you could go and take care of
Mm.
kids. And I just got super frustrated at that. So I had a cancer tantrum, which was very funny. Just like it played out. So when it comes to my career and how that's expressed, people will often see me as someone that they'll talk about in Cancerian terms. Because of that midheaven placement, they'll say like, "Oh, I'm very, very familiar. I feel like I have a community," and people often say like, "I create a really nurturing space and give them ability to express themselves." Um, but that moon was obviously in Libra, so you can already
Mm.
see that I was gathering self-knowledge from different perspectives, which is a very Libran quality.
Mm-hmm.
But that's trined like to perfection with a Saturn in Aquarius in the fifth. Um, and so that's where a lot of like the more earthiness and groundedness but comes from, which is very different from all these other placements, which are like fire and air. So
Mm.
to answer your question, it comes out in a lot of like the ideas and the expression, but it's very sort of not seen much by a lot of people because of that midheaven placement.
Yeah, and it's interesting. If I remember correctly, my midheaven is also Cancer, I think. Yeah, we have a lot of similarities in our chart apparently. Yeah. I have a stellium in Virgo, which means that the Virgo
Mm,
energy is pretty. So I have like three. I think my Mars, Venus, and is it Neptune? I think it's Neptune. All of them are in Virgo, and I always joke that I feel so sorry for my partners with my Mars and Venus being both in Virgo because it means just like obviously the shadow side or the lower octave is that the Virgo can be quite the perfectionist, you know, like really high expectations. So I always joke that I feel sorry for my partners basically because the expectations are like you're going to be perfect. I have obviously worked a ton on that and it's not showing up so strongly in my personality anymore, but it is certainly something I had to become aware of and create some. It is one of the areas where I feel I had to create some flexibility and growth around, basically.
yeah, I totally understand like where that's coming from. The funny thing is that I love to surround myself with people that have heavy Virgo placements because of their raising of the standards. And I love that they always want to go higher, even though they might see it as like pain and like, we can do better. I love that they lift it up. And I'm like, oh, cool. There's better. There's something more ideal than what we're doing. And I love that. Mm.
Yeah, yeah. And what's so funny with me though is also because of my Leo sun sign. The Leos have a tendency to be they're definitely not perfectionists, right? They're like, I have a plan, I have a vision, I'll figure it out. Whilst my Virgo side is like, but Tor, how are we gonna do it? How are you gonna do it? So it's like finding that healthy balance between the sort of more flowy Leo and Libra in many ways, I think. And the Virgo, he's like, but you got to make a plan. You know, it's such an interesting
Mm,
and it's so interesting what you just said earlier about the cancer in midheaven and working with kids because I also received the same message and I was like, I don't really want to work with kids. Like that's
mm,
not I don't feel entirely drawn towards that. So it's really interesting, but obviously there's other ways that it can show up too. So, you know, your content is focused towards spirituality, soulfulness, but also your vocation. I think even on your, what does it say on your podcast? Where career meets soulfulness. Is that correct?
yeah.
So that's a
Where
really
where career
interesting,
meets soul. Yeah.
where career meets soul. And you know, I think that's such a beautiful phrase. And I was just watching one of your videos this morning before we were logging on about the need for spiritual jobs and you know just before we came on you know I talked about how I thought that your content was really contemporary and modern and I suppose just from your perspective and I mean we've sort of delved into now with astrology but of course there's much more to spirituality than astrology and so I suppose I'd like to understand from your point of view like what does spirituality and let's say soulfulness mean to you?
Hmm. So, I mean, there's a couple of layers to that question. I would say that the soul is the divine aspect of ourselves, and the spirit is more of the collective energy of all of us. And so I typically will split those
Mm,
two things up. So the soul is about
okay.
the individual development of our own personal, how we meant to unfold in this lifetime, whereas the spirit is this collective. Since we're talking in astrology terms,
Mm,
the spirit is more the Piscean energy. It's the all-encompassing
mm,
everywhere. And so when I'm talking about soul meets career, it's like your personal development of your soul within your work in this lifetime. And I believe that when we do the right work, we can actually develop our soul in that work at the same time, do what we're meant to do on a personal level. And that, by consequence, affects the spiritual whole. So that's how I sort of categorize it in my mind. And that's one of the reasons why I do this kind of work, because I believe that the careers, as the way that they're walked, they have no soul, meaning that they have no development for the individual at that level. They can develop you, buy a home, start a business, make some money,
Mm,
raise your status, but it doesn't develop you on that deeper internal, we could even say like the religious terrain.
mm,
And and that's a problem.
mm. And what is that problem?
The problem is that you're not personally developing your own soul. So you're not doing this soul level work for the collective contribution that you're meant to make in this lifetime.
Mm. Just as you were speaking, and I mean everything that you just said really resonates, and I'm realizing I'm jumping a bit here and there and everywhere, but I wish as you were talking, you're doing something with your life which is somewhat unique. You know, you are talking about spirituality and soulfulness and creating a YouTube channel that has those energies to it. Did you receive any pushback from like friends, family members, people around you who was like, Joe, what are you doing? Like, this will never make you a living. Like, did you receive any pushback from people around you?
Yeah, I did. Not as much as I thought I would. A lot of it was sort of like preconceived ideas of how people would judge me once I left.
Mm,
One of the main ones was I had a really good relationship with my boss that I was working with in this insurance gig, and he was trying to keep me because he could see that I was, slowly fading off.
mm.
And we had a conversation after I told him that I was leaving, and I could see that he was worried about me. And he essentially said, out of that worry, hey, rather than going to help, because I told everybody I'm going to go help people find their purpose, and that's what it was back then. It was this idea of I'm going to help people find their purpose.
Mm.
But out of that worry, he said, you could go and consult with these big companies. I can help you find the connections, and you can do, because I was doing personality tests in sort of this HR area, and I'd done a
Okay.
little bit of work
Yeah.
for them. You can go and do this consulting stuff in these other companies, and you will make lots of money. And he said, because there's no money in helping Joe Everyman. And I just remember being like, there's something so wrong with that. I hadn't articulated what's wrong with that, but I just felt there's something so wrong with that. So he was pushing me towards that. I could tell that he was worried. That set into me. That annoyed me. It caused a little bit of friction, a little bit of hesitation. But I'd already said that I was going to quit. So I was like, oh, it's happening. It's too late. Yeah.
It's so fast. So it sounds to me from what you just said is that you don't focus on getting corporate work, right? Because it is true. You could go and get work in corporates. And I, over the last 3 years, have had a relative amount of corporate work, corporates who are like sort of interested in what it is that I do, but it doesn't sound like. Have you been able to offer your services in more of a corporate setting, or have you shied away from that entirely because it didn't feel aligned to who and what you are? Like, have you managed to find a balance there, or how do you use that?
Yeah, so I definitely said I'm not going to do anything for anyone corporate, like as a
Yeah.
company. And then in the very beginning, I was just helping people to find their purpose. And then there was a little shift where I was like, okay, I next need to help people figure out their career. I hadn't figured out that it was meant to be sort of imbued with spirituality and soul. And so I was kind of just putting out, I'll help you with your career. And that
Mm,
brought in some people that just wanted career transitions. Nothing deeper, just get me
mm,
out of this job and into this job, and I'll be happy. And there was something missing in that work for me. So then I had
mm,
to stop that as well. Um, and there is a little bit of tension for me with the world of corporations and all that kind of
mm,
stuff. Um, I do think that there are some people that are meant to be working in those roles. I just
mm,
think it's way less than what it is at the moment. Um,
mm,
but yeah, there was a lot of friction, a lot of tension around that. And also I've been carrying my own personal scars with me. So I'm not going to help that area because it did a number on me. At least that's the way that I
Mm,
felt. Mm.
mm. Yeah, it's so interesting with corporate work. I have done some of it, and I only do it if it feels like 80% aligned to what it is that I already do. So, like, for example, one of my offerings is like I do tarot readings, for example. And like during, so in London, I don't know if you have this in Australia, but for example, we have like Wellness Week, or like corporates have what they call a Wellness Week, which is kind of
Mm.
ridiculous, but whatever. And I sometimes occasionally get booked by brands basically to come in during Wellness Week to give like short tarot readings to their employees, which is kind of like just fun, but it is interesting. And I don't know it like yourself, I do have some there's an energetic tension or there's something which feels inauthentic about doing quote unquote corporate work. And it's, I actually don't entirely know yet what it is because a corporation is still people, right? So you're still helping people, but because it is in that box of a corporation, there's something about it which feels slightly off. Like, what are your thoughts, Joe?
Yeah, I definitely think that I got two thoughts. So one thought is sort of like this irony that I noticed a little bit, which was I'd noticed some corporations that bring in, say for example, we've hired a yoga instructor to help
Mm-hmm.
out the entire company. And then they will enforce some sort of policies that cause people to have like a blocked throat chakra. And it's like
Mm,
the philosophies that they bring in don't actually allow these philosophies to expand within these places. So
mm,
there's like these friction points there. I'm unsure if it can ever properly allow someone to be able to fully walk their path. But in saying that, I remember when I was unearthing different people's career archetypes, and before I showed people how to unearth it themselves, I would go and do the work to unearth their own career archetype for them. And as I was doing different people's career archetypes, I had to learn that I had to be super impartial because their work was different from, say, something that I
mm-hmm.
had a bias around. So, for example, some
Mm,
people I worked with, like they were meant to go back into the workplace, and I found that very hard to deal with. Because I was like, well, you shouldn't. So
mm,
I had these biases and these beliefs, and yet I found people through all the different research that I'd done for them, like, oh, you should be going and maybe staying there for a period, staying longer than I would say you sh would want you to. Um,
mm.
yeah, so I think it's a bigger bigger conversation that requires,
Yeah.
yeah,
And,
deeper
and it's
dives.
so interesting with that impartiality, isn't it? Because that's also something, I mean, I've had a very good teacher who's been able to help me do that, but it's the same thing with doing a tarot readings, for example. I really shouldn't project any of my biases onto that reading because technically I suppose
Mm,
when you are doing the archetypal work for somebody else you are quote unquote doing a reading. It's just a different modality, a way of getting there, sort of. You're just framing that
mm,
differently, and it's so interesting when I do a reading for somebody and I was like, I just wouldn't do that. That just wouldn't be my way. But that doesn't matter. Like
mm,
it's their life, it's their path. I can only share the information that is in front of me. So it's how did you overcome that hurdle or bump in the road of impartiality? Like, what was the inner work that you had to do? Yeah, what was the inner work that you had to do?
it was so there is a part of my personality that's just naturally like that, where I can sort of
Mm,
detach and view things from outside of myself and my situation. So
mm,
there was that part. The other part was just me being frustrated. And like there wasn't any special question or process that I went through. I was just frustrated. And I find a lot of things through my frustration. So it's kind of this blessing curse thing. But I was just frustrated. And then I would always be asking, but what's best for them? What's best for their calling? What's best for their vocation? What is best for this
mm,
person? And that would that would tell me the answers, even though maybe I didn't personally agree with that. And that always taught me a lot. But that's sort of how I dealt with it.
I suppose it's like a deep practice of acceptance, isn't it? In many ways, like you just have to accept that
Mm.
this is not your this. So, would you say that this is a primary way that you support people now? Is that you support them through, or you guide them, coach them through finding their archetype, and then supporting them in whatever decision that they want to make in terms of their career? Like, would you say that that's the sort of main way that you are currently working with people, or are there other ways that you also work with people?
So I work with people in the sense of it's all about the vocation. What is your calling?
Mm,
How do you pursue your calling? And what I've been spending a lot of time on, especially in the early periods, like the early few years, is how does someone choose the right path, the path that is correct for them. And when I say right, I mean internally, you know
mm,
it's correct. So that's what I've spent the majority of my time on. I'm slowly starting to work with people in a different capacity, like future steps. Like, okay, now I know, now I'm walking the path, I'm coming up against different sorts of challenges. But a lot of my work was in that early stage of how do I actually choose the right path? And the way that I help people is by bringing up that career archetype.
that's really, really interesting. Do you ever find that to be by choosing, by like honing in on supporting people in finding their vocation, do you find that limiting, or do you find that sort of really, really interesting and liberating in a way? Like, because you, like, for example, the reason I'm asking is because, like, for example, on Instagram or on YouTube, you find people who's like a love coach, basically, and they only focus on that. Like, how have you found honing in on that one thing and, yeah, working on that?
For me, it's funny, I was having this conversation with someone the other day um, about this very thing. I needed something that felt so big that I couldn't complete it in a lifetime. I needed
Mm,
something that I would be like, I can't get this done. And there were all these other different paths. And I knew this because when I was trying to figure out my path before, where I could sort of see the endpoint, or I could see where that goes or it ends. And I just automatically would be like, no, that's not the path for me. And so, just on a personal level, I needed something that was so grand, so big that I would be like, if I lived for 500 years, I still couldn't figure out this whole work thing. Yeah.
mm. Okay, that's really interesting. So even though you are focusing in on vocation, it's still incredibly expansive. So even yeah, even though you had 5 lifetimes, you wouldn't complete it. That's really interesting because it's also something that some people will always be struggling with, and also, and this was also something I was thinking we should touch on briefly, which is of course now the AI revolution, right? I think that I mean, even as I say that word, there's a like there's an energy within me which is just like I just feel for people a lot right now in terms of we just don't know the effect that AI is going to have on people's lives. And I'm so glad I am in like a people business and like the business of humans, basically. But it's also you also do hear contradicting voices though, and I can't remember his name, but he is some sort of futurist or like a futurist consultant. And he was like, don't worry about AI for the next 20 years. We don't have the chips to make the revolution that people think it's going to be creating. And then other people is like, it's going to change tomorrow. So who knows how it's all going to go. But yeah, what are some of your thoughts? Because I was also listening to, I don't know if you listened to this podcast, but Simon Sinek was recently interviewed on The Diary of a CEO by Stephen Bartlett, and he's kind of terrified with what AI will do to like human skills. Like, what are some of your reflections around AI and vocation and work? Because it's regardless of how long it's going to take, it's obviously going to change. So yeah, what are some of your reflections on that?
Yeah. I mean, personally, I got really lucky because of the field that I'm in. And I sort of was reading about the future of
Mm,
paths a while back and just understanding what people were saying about what's coming. And people have been ringing the alarm bells for, you know, well,
mm.
5+ years and saying like, hey, everybody, this technology is coming, and at some point it's going to replace people. And I remember I was having this conversation with this guy really early on. He was a client of mine, and we were having this argument. Like I'll argue with my clients sometimes and be like, no, this is what you should do. Um, and so he was telling me that he should become a coder. And I was saying, like, based on everything that you're getting pulled towards, like it's not coding. You're just looking at this because the money sign is 150, 160K, and that's amazing setup, and you can go buy a house and all that kind of stuff. But it's not actually your calling. He actually ended up going against my advice and went and became a coder. And I just remember in that moment, sort of reflecting on some of what was coming. I was like, there's no sort of longevity in that. There's no sort of sustainability in that. This job is going to go away. And so whilst they might have a little bit of a pay bump at the moment, it's
Mm.
eventually going to fade. Which also led me to, okay, well, if my stuff gets ruined. If someone else can come in and say, hey, there's this robot and it can help you choose your career path, and it's the best robot at doing this, am I still going to be doing what I want to be doing? Is this really my calling? And so I had to sit with those types of questions for a while. And there was that
Mm.
other factor of universal basic income that came in, this idea
Mm.
that at some point, hey, we're not going to need you to come to work, and you're going to be allowed to go out and do your own thing. And I started to think of just human nature. Okay, everyone's going to think that's amazing. Everyone's going to start to jump into like these pleasure parties and just be like, I'm just going to chase dopamine. But then what? And at some point, there's going to be some form of crisis, of some form of
Mm.
I need something more, I need something higher. And at around that time, and this probably was around, I want to say like 2019, 2020, I was starting to get these hits of you need to be working with people that are in the spiritual domains, and
Mm.
those are like really, really strong. And then those kind of factors plus that, I was like, oh, okay, people are gonna have to deal with these different level of problems that humans are gonna have. We don't quite know exactly what these are, but there's gonna be a new type of work that technology can't access. And that type of work is the work that I'm interested in. And
Mm.
like you sort of mentioned it, like the people work and what does that
Mm.
look like? Um, we're sort of seeing the beginnings of it. Lots of people are doing trauma work, these kinds of things, and
Mm.
that's amazing. Doing deeper healings, that's amazing. But I think there's a new level, and I think that that's what's coming. I don't know what that is. There's no name for it, but there's something else. It's not just a void and we just chill. There's like a new thing.
Yeah, there is a new thing. I agree with you, and I'm not entirely sure what it is either, because it's like, are we stepping into 1984 or are we stepping into Brave New World? Or something entirely different. And I think that, yeah, I suppose, what do I think? I think that the work will be whatever it is that leads people to do, in many ways, what you described earlier is like whatever mechanism, path, practice that leads people to authentically, genuinely, deeply connect to their soul, and from that place of soulfulness, connect to the greater spirit. Because I think that unless an individual takes themselves through that process, it will create a crisis of meaning, right? Because I think that through that work of connecting deeply with your soul and then spirit and also other people, it's I can't see how it would not lead to a crisis of meaning or just a sense of purposelessness, basically. So I think that's probably what that next thing is. And yeah, then we have to hold space for people to do that, I guess. Something of that vein. That's kind of what I feel. But yeah, what do you feel?
Yeah, I feel something similar. It's this post work, post job, post career space
Mm.
seems to be, obviously I talk about it as vocation or sacred calling, this different type of work that is still important for
Mm.
your own um, personal growth and for the contribution of humanity. It just doesn't look the same as what we've seen. And so it's going to be a whole different way. We all don't know. Anyone that says they know, they don't know. It's like
Mm-mm.
we're entering a space of the unknown. And obviously that's scary, but at the same time, I think that with the people that are coming through, that are looking to build in that space, I have hope. I have a lot of hope, and maybe that's my Sagittarius sun, but I've got a lot of optimism for the future.
Me too, and I
Mhm.
like that phrase, post-work. I think that's a really interesting framework of looking at it. Like, what happens post-work, basically, when all the jobs are gone? What do we do? Like, do we create new jobs, or do we support people in creating daily practices? If it's like looking after kids, looking after old people, art, community, whatever, just something to, yeah, support people towards finding meaning, basically. I want to guide us towards a stronger conversation around because I really want to just get this in here before we begin to close it down. And I think this is a bit about you as a content creator because I think that especially on YouTube, you have managed to shape and form a really strong and distinctive brand and offering. And I think also what you do really well is that the way that you speak about spirituality and soulfulness is very modern and contemporary, and that's something that really resonate with myself. And I think what it also does really well is that it's incredibly down to earth and practical. Not to pass any judgment, but some spiritual content is quite impractical in ways, and it's not necessarily something that helps you day to day. So, like for example, I mean, this was a bit cheeky of me, but I was in a conversation with somebody, and they said, "Oh, have you heard about this new discovery beneath the pyramid? It's proving the existence of Atlantis." And I was like, "Oh, that's interesting. Does it pay your bills? Like, does this you, does I mean it's interesting, but I know that you have loads of problems in your life around your work. Like, does this knowledge, does this spiritual knowledge help you pay your bills?" And I mean, it was a bit cheeky of me, but I think what I, yeah, especially like about your content is that it's very down to earth and it's about helping people where they are today. And I suppose I'd love for you to speak a bit about how you arrived there and why you chose to go that path of spirituality and spiritual content, soulful content, rather than another path, basically.
Hmm. And just on that story, I think be cheeky when people are doing that. I love that. So I've always loved the idea of so there's an idea, and I can't remember exactly where it comes from. I want to say it's like ancient Indian tantric traditions. However, they talk about the energy of the all. It can come down or it can go up. It can come into manifestation or it can go towards liberation. And I've always felt as though there are very particular types of paths that are meant for liberation. They're very particular type, like mystic might be one, a monk might be one. This is moving upwards, ascending. But most of us are here to do work like in the world. It's here.
Mm,
And liberation can often become this form of avoidance. So for me, I know that my work has that sense of soul in it, but I want to bring it into the world,
mm,
into existence. And so I often will approach things like, how can I bring this and make this like more tangible? Can we give some earth to it? Can people like hold it? Is it useful? Is it applied? And that was also coming through as of my love for particular philosophers as well. I didn't really vibe with a lot of them that would have these grand abstract theories. I was like, okay, well, where's some ones that have like the grittiness of daily life? Um, and so my approach has always been applied knowledge, applied philosophy. Does it work? And if it does work, okay, it's probably closer to the truth. So that's how I'm approaching it. When it comes to this idea of content creator, I do see content creator as its own career archetype, one that I'm not
mm,
associated with. I don't express myself as a content creator. I'm a philosopher, but I'm on these different channels. Okay, how does a philosopher show up on YouTube? How does a philosopher show up on Instagram? How does a philosopher show up on Substack? And by just viewing it like that, it helps me to be like, well, I'm not doing these like gimmicky cut things because the philosopher
mm,
that I'm becoming isn't that. And some people, it's congruent with them. Like they are that person. They are someone that's meant to be like high speed and and all these flashes. But for me, and the type of person and the type of philosopher that I want to be is not that. So I knew that
Mm,
much. Uh, I think I said this to you earlier as well, that I'd done some Instagram reels and stuff, and I'd done some quick cuts, and it's just everything in me fell off. Um, and like trusting when that feels off, I think has been really big and useful to me. I think that we all sort of know as well. We can get in touch with ourselves and those subtle, like, hey, this is a bit, this isn't me, this isn't you. I think that's really
mm,
useful. And to listen to that over, I don't know, say the classic algorithm advice that is circulating the electronic highway or Instagram or a TikTok or something like that. And
mm.
yeah.
Just listening to you speaking, I am hearing some innate confidence, which I'm sure you've also worked at because it takes confidence and courage to go, that is not for me, so I am not going to do it. Where does, because I think I work with so many clients who either lack courage or lack confidence, or at least they think they do. And so, where do you think your courage and confidence to go, that is not for me, so I'm not going to do it, so I'm going to do this other thing, and I'm going to trust that this is right for me? Like, where does that come from for you?
So I can give sort of like two like strains of thought because I don't think it's like a singular answer. We've got one strain of thought, which is my mom would pump me up with self-esteem. Anything I did
Mm.
and everything I did, amazing. I would pour the coffee and she's like, that's the best coffee I've ever had in my life. And I'm like, thanks, mom. You know what I mean? And I
Mm.
got that, and I was lucky to get that. I got the opposite energy from my dad, who's like, be better and try harder. But she
Mm.
pumped me with self-esteem. And I think that I just naturally have that sort of self-talk embedded within
Mm.
myself. The other thing, though, is that I had this real long period where I did not want to be on camera. I was literally afraid of the camera. And since I know that people that listen to you would know about astrology, like Chiron and Leo, I have that. And so I
Mm.
just deep wounds around being seen with more transparency. And so I wouldn't show up on camera. I would do calls with people with the camera off. It was a whole
All
thing
right.
that I had to
All right.
to, to go through. And that took a long time uh, to learn. And I want to say it was like a year or two where I'd be recording myself on videos, watching it back, but I'd never post it online. And I'd just be looking like, "Ugh," it was really hard to watch myself back and hear my voice. And there was this, yeah, trouble um, for a period. And but I got over that through this like slow exposure to that and just perseverance, honestly.
Mm.
And then I slowly started to just expand the circle of comfort. So sometimes I'd start to speak with clients with the video on, then I'd start to like post a story on Instagram or something like that. And then it slowly started to unfold and I'd shine my light on myself. But yeah, that was a bit of a mission.
That's so interesting, and thank you so much for sharing that because someone who now looks at your YouTube now just wouldn't see that. They wouldn't see that you've been on that journey of in the beginning not being able to even be on camera with clients, and now you obviously speak so confidently to the camera. And it's so funny because my wound is probably the opposite. I'm like, look at me, like I can do it, I can be on camera. And the wound is if nobody looks. If nobody's looking,
Uh,
that the wound is the opposite. It's like, why are
mm,
you not looking at me? And
mm.
so
That's funny.
I have had to, I suppose the wound that I've had to work through is like internal self-validation, and
Mm,
working through that. And it's okay. Like if nobody's looking, who cares? Like I'm doing it for myself because I think it's great and I want to express this anyway, even if nobody's looking. And so
mm,
that's such an interesting because I was like that as a child as well. Like anytime there was an opportunity to be on camera, to stand on stage, to do anything where anyone was looking, I was like, I'll do it. I'll do it. Like as a child, basically, which is really interesting. Um, just
Which
to,
I could always do more with that.
yeah,
Like, I love that. Yeah.
I've, I've just had it innately as a kid, and I mean, I suppose some of it maybe. I mean, thank you for sharing that thing about your mom and your dad, because I think in so many ways. So I'm the youngest of like five, And so I think that maybe one thing that I didn't get so much at home is that I probably didn't get so much of the attention that I really needed as a child. And so it
Mm,
then showed up in other arenas where I was like, I need more attention, so please look at me, basically. And so
mm,
I think that's, but then also as an adult, that's obviously that then over time has actually really built my confidence. And I now have no problem in standing in front of a large crowd. Like I held I was going to say coronation there, but it's not coronation. What is it called when you finish uni? I can't remember it. My English is eluding me right now.
graduation.
That's the word. Graduation. Like I did the graduation speech, like no problem. That was totally fine. So it's that kind of, it actually, by not getting the attention that I needed at home, I sought it elsewhere. And through that sorting it elsewhere, I built the confidence to stand in front of crowds speaking. And so I
Mm.
suppose in so many ways, it's a gift in disguise, basically. Um, just as a, because we haven't actually spoken that much about the other types of archetypes. So just as a 101 to bring everything to a close, what is the 101 on archetypes?
So, I mean, one way to think about it is it's this recurring pattern that shows you your direction in life. We can also think about it as this, when Jung was talking about archetypes, and he sort of pulled this from Plato, but this idea of a God image, a base level image that you're meant to like express or it's meant to come out. So
Mm,
when I work with people and their archetypes, really what I'm looking for is like the pattern of life that they're meant to be pursuing that is soul led. And so what is that pattern? And everybody has a different pattern. It's one of the reasons why, people come in and they're like, okay, where's your 8 career archetypes or where's your 16 career archetypes? And I'm like, sorry, there's hundreds and we're gonna have to find yours. And yours might not even be on my
mm,
list. Like I have a list of 450 plus career archetype names, but students are
ah,
unearthing different ones all the time, because we're trying to find like what is your personal one and what are you specifically meant for. And when we find that pattern, then we name it. And so the name is the finalization. Most people come in for the name, but it's like that's actually not the most important part. It's the understanding of the essence and the energy that is underneath everything.
And it's so funny that what you just said, right before you said it, I was like, I'm going to ask Joel what he thinks the name, the title of my career.
Yeah.
The brain does that, doesn't it? The brain just was like, I
Yeah.
wonder what the title is. I'm like obsessed with the title, but it's actually more about going deeper and like figuring what the essence or the energy of that out and then bringing out that energy into the world, basically. What would you say is there a most common archetype out there? Like what have you experienced?
No, no, I think it's quite interesting that a lot of people, let's say for example, would associate with a very popular archetype like artist, end up going through this unearthing process and find that artist isn't actually their career archetype. It just has an affinity towards what it is that they want to be doing, and there's a reason that that one hasn't quite worked out for them. So there are so many different ones. There's no real popular one. I mean, I think we've had I want to say like 3 people have unearthed the mystic career archetype. That's
Mm-hmm.
probably the most popular. That's not even very popular, with just 3. So yeah, there's no most popular one. There's many.
Mm. It's so interesting that you have this framework around the archetypes, and I think it helps people to create, what I think just sort of off the cuff, what I think it does, is that it does create some sense of identity and grounding, right? It creates a way to Yeah, it creates a way for you to ground yourself in a way, I guess, right? And I think that's in a world which lacks grounding, I think, finding a way to ground yourself through that archetypal journey can be quite interesting. Do you find that so I'm assuming the archetype could change throughout your lifetime?
So the archetype won't change.
Okay.
The essence of it won't change. What can happen though is that a career archetype can be expressed in these
Okay, so the
different
expression.
forms.
Mm,
And so, like, so for example, my career archetype is philosopher, but sometimes I'll be like, will express as a teacher to teach my philosophy. But a teacher isn't my career archetype. It's an expression of me trying to teach my philosophy at the base. It's philosopher.
mm, okay. How interesting. I mean, I think just, I mean, I'd obviously have to think about it a bit more, but I think like my career archetype sort of generally, I suppose it's guide in a way. That's probably that word resonates quite a bit with me. Um, I'd have to think about it, but just as a top level, what I felt right now, it's that notion of being a guide, the guide archetype, if that is such a thing, basically. I think that's probably what would, yeah, just in the moment, that is probably something that would resonate the most, I think.
I mean, I couldn't tell you. You
Yeah,
have
I
to
just
go through the process.
I'd have to go through the process.
Yeah, we've
Yeah.
had one guide. We've had one guide. But yeah, I couldn't do that thing where
Yeah,
sometimes
yeah.
people will jump on and they'll be like, what do you get? What do you get in the first 5 seconds?" And I'm like, I get nothing. I get nothing.
Yeah, because there's a part of me which is like, Joel, tell me, just tell me. I know, I have to be, there's a, of course, there's a journey that you have to go through.
Yeah,
This, is there anything we haven't touched in terms of yourself and what you do that you would like us to touch before we bring this to a close?
no, I mean, I feel as though we touched everything. The main thing that I do is just helping people to choose the right career path when they don't know
Mm,
which path to choose. And I typically work with
mm,
people that walk alternative, non-traditional paths. And I think that's becoming more and more popular. And going the non-traditional and alternative path is becoming the more traditional route, which is super interesting that that's changed over the past couple of years.
yeah, it is interesting, isn't it? And I think that, yeah, you're definitely in the right place of supporting and holding that space for people to go through that transition and figuring out how to make that work. Because it was one of the videos that you did, which is also talking about money, right? Which is often, and I see that myself in my own work, is the main hurdle is to figure out or your thinking on your energy or whatever through finances because it is, yeah, it's a challenge. You know, you have to, we live in a world where bills are, you know, piling up and cost of living and sort of trying to, yeah, get your head around. I know how I've made it work for the last 3 years, but there's also certain choices I've had to make to follow my calling, right? But that's also been worth it. Basically, that choice has been worth it. But yeah, and I think so often when I get to work with people, that is where the main resistance sort of comes in, basically. Yeah, and I thought it was really interesting
Mm,
the bit of content that you create around that. And I thought that was really, yeah, really useful.
mm. How did you go about it? I'm curious.
So, I mean, I find a lot of meaning from my work, and so I don't mind generally of like quote unquote earning a lot less money than I would having like a corporate job, basically. I could get a corporate job, I could get a good wage, but that's not what's most important to me. And so I am perfectly content with having what some people would call a more frugal lifestyle, I guess, because
Mm,
I get so much meaning from my work. I mean, it is a challenge, especially it is some mental work that I've had to do in particular because of like cost of living crisis, basically, which is there's certain things that are inevitably out of your control, basically. And so
mm,
like moving my mind through that and figuring out how to make it work has been an interesting, yeah, an interesting opportunity for growth, basically. But I think the main way I have resolved it short term and possibly even long term, and that's fine, is just through having what some people would call a more frugal lifestyle, basically. That's how I've and I'm totally content with that in many ways. There's other challenges that it creates, and one of them, for example, is I have yet to meet a partner who is up for living a similar lifestyle to myself, basically. And
mm,
so meeting somebody who is aligned with that, especially when you're like a gay man living in London. And then there's other challenges like I don't drink, I don't really party, like I don't do all of those quote unquote
mm,
normal or typical things that people would do.
And a lot of gay men in their early 30s, 40s, they are still doing that, and I'm just not interested. And so that's a
Mm,
challenge in and itself, but also to find somebody who's interested in living that sort of frugal-ish lifestyle, basically, has also been a challenge. But I'm also in no doubt that when the time is right, they will come about, basically. I'm not also no, in no doubt about that will happen. So I'm, yeah, like internally, I'm okay with that.
yeah, that's super interesting. Because I mean, for myself in the beginning, it was, up and down, and cash was up and down, and it was just an emotional roller coaster of trying to figure this thing out. And I too had
Mm,
to be frugal in the early
mm.
in the early days as well. Um, I'll just ask one more question because you got me curious about this topic.
Sure.
Some other people have been talking to me about it. Um, when it comes to do you see yourself moving towards a place where, let's say, financially, I don't want to say, yeah, financially prosperous, just too much, or do you like, are you like, I don't really care. I'm going to live this way, and I know that that's correct for me, or is there a movement towards something more money wise?
Gosh, it is such an interesting question. If I had all of my basic needs covered, I would not care about the money. It just isn't. It just isn't what drives me, basically. It has never
Mm,
been, and I suspect that it'll never be. I think that, of course, what I am working towards, albeit it's still being an illusion because nothing is certain and nothing is predictable. Um, I am working towards some more financial stability, but not at the cost of living my life authentically. Does that make sense? So, like, for
yeah,
example,
yeah.
um, then I could just go and get a corporate job, you know? I could just go
Hmm.
and get a job which pays really well, but I will be super unhappy with it. And so I suppose the answer to your question is technically no, but that doesn't mean in the sense of safety, a feeling of like financial stability and safety. That'd be nice because it's still a, it's still a roller coaster basically. It goes up and down all the time. And so, but I think that I've done it for 3 years. There's nothing to suggest that I shouldn't be able to do it for three more or for the rest of my life, basically. And I think I've just kind of accepted that this is the path that I'm choosing to live. Nobody's holding a gun to my head. I could stop anytime. I could
Mm,
end this at any time. This is all my choice, basically. And so through that radical responsibility, it also creates some level of acceptance. Doesn't mean that there aren't days where anxiety creeps in, but overall, there's a feeling of deep acceptance because I know that this is my choice.
mm. No, that's really cool. I love that. Yeah.
And I think that, I mean, this is sort of seething with judgment, but we are living in a society which is always striving for more stuff, more holidays, more experiences out, and yet people have a crisis of meaning. Maybe something
Agree.
about,
Yeah.
maybe something about that equation has to change, you know? And so then I suspect that even though I have a lot less income than a lot of people who work a normal job, I suspect I am overall much happier and have a lot more sense of meaning, you know? And we all know the health benefits of having a sense of meaning and purposes. So just like
Hmm.
there's something about, but I think of course, there's a bit of a journey of taking people through navigating and perhaps transforming that equation as well. And I mean, the thing is, I have clients who's got like they've got the kids, they've got the expensive house, they've got a lot of expenses that I don't have. So I also understand that some people they have to have a high paying job to be able to sustain that lifestyle with having kids. again, it is a bit of an illusion. You can certainly change it, but when I'm listening to some people speak, I'm like, I kind of get it. Like, I
Mm,
get why you have to make that choice. And this is where, I have to stay as impartial and unbiased as I possibly can, which is what we were um, talking about earlier. But again, it's an intentional choice I mean, I'm probably never going to have children, but it's an intentional choice to not have children. It's an
mm,
intentional choice to not do certain things because, at least for the time being, I wouldn't be able to do what I do for a living, and I love what I do for a living.
mm. Yeah, yeah, it's like a really good point. There are definitely practical realities that we have to deal with on our paths,
Yeah.
and the transition of people that are more, I suppose, in the mud of life, they have to deal with harder practical realities when it comes to their transitions. And oftentimes I'll notice that we have to make it 2 years, 3 years is very, very
Yeah.
slow. It's going to take some time. We have to build in safety as like a really core pillar to their
Mm.
own personal like transition into whatever their path is. Um,
Mm.
the other thing I've noticed as well, just on this topic of finances, is that I'm very much similar to you. I'll be like, okay, soul first, then money. It's like not the opposite way around because that'll just do my head in. And the thing that I'm noticing more at the moment, and this isn't for everybody, this is just my thing, is to do certain levels of the work that I want to be doing later on in the future, I do have to bring in more money. And so I'm like, oh, okay, like this is actually deeply connected now. And I'm past this phase of just bringing in the money to support myself and support like my girlfriend and all that kind of stuff. But there's like a new level of what is this money actually? What's its intention? I suppose. And when the
Mm.
intention changes, well, it's just changing on my path. So yeah, that's why I was asking you about you.
Yeah, and I can relate to that. I can relate to that a lot because there is certain things that I do want to do in the future in terms of my work, and that is simply going to require some more money. So more money has to come in one shape or form, basically. But I still, like you just said, soul always has to come first. And so let's say that money doesn't come in to serve those ambitions. Okay, then it probably means that those ambitions weren't right for me. Like that's how I then that's my sort of mental software that kicks in basically of
Hmm,
how I deal with that. I suppose. Yeah. That's how I
hmm,
navigate that that's how I navigate that in my mind.
makes sense. Yeah.
Just as a final question, actually, as we've still got you here, do you have a meditation practice?
So I don't have a daily one. I
Okay.
have periods. I've had periods of my life where I have done like long periods of mantra work.
Mhm.
I remember I saw an astrologer a while ago. It was probably about 3 years ago. And it was that period where what was it? One of the nodes was playing up in our first house because we both got Libra rising.
Mm.
And so he gave me a mantra practice so that it didn't just like ruin everything. And so I did that mantra practice, and that was, I think it was something like 600 mantras a day of a particular wording. And I did that for a period of like 6 months every single day. But I've never been someone to do daily stuff.
Right.
More so, am I facing something particular? And then I'll just go in on that very particular thing.
Gotcha. Right, right, right. Interesting. Yeah, no, I have a daily meditation practice. I was just curious about what that looked like for yourself. This has been such a pleasure, Joel. I feel like I've met a kindred soul. That's been such a pleasure. Thank you so much for coming on.
Likewise. You're welcome. It was great speaking to you.